right.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to call this meeting to order at 1:09. I'm going to read the statement about executive session pursuant to ARS 38-431.02. Notice is hereby given to the members of the commission and to the general public that at this regular meeting, the commission may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public. For legal advice and discussion with the city's attorneys for legal advice on any item listed on the following agenda pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3. I will start with roll call. Eric Brownfield. Here. Tyler Denham. Here. Kevin Dobby. Karen Flores. Here. Jackie Kellogg.
Here.
Devonna is excused. Moses. Excused. Corey Grundy.
Here.
Ross Schaefer. Sean Slauson.
Here.
Oh, there she is. Sean Slauson. Glenn Slivers. Haley Zaroya.
Here.
And myself, Sandy Flores. Adrian, do we have quorum then?
Great, now chair for the day. None. Yep. we're
All
good.
right, we do have a quorum. Thank you, everyone. We have pretty big agenda today, and we do need quorum for the majority of things because a couple of us have to recuse ourselves from one of the items. So if you are going to need to step out for any reason, either virtually or please let Adriana know so we can just make sure we always maintain that quorum. And then Karen Flores, would you mind reading our land acknowledgement?
Sure. The Housing Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to the indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place is home.
Thank you very much. Okay. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within their jurisdiction that is not scheduled before the commission on that day. Due to open meeting laws, the commission cannot discuss or act on items presented during this portion of the agenda. To address the commission on an item that is on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time the item is heard. Knowing that, is there any general public comment?
I don't have any online.
Okay, seeing none. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes. Consideration and approval of the minutes of the Housing Commission meeting September 28, 2023. If there are questions or has everyone reviewed them? If not, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes from September.
And I will second it, Tyler.
Okay. Moved by Commissioner Flores, Karen Flores, and seconded by Commissioner Denham. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Right, we are approved.
I only heard one online.
We have everyone that is online, please yay or nay at this time.
I'm sorry.
This is Ross. I have a question. Do you need us to abstain if we were not at the last meeting?
No.
Terrific, then. Yay.
She need to abstain if she was not present, but we said that. So. We have
Did you come forth? Under 3 online. 3 online. Haley, Jackie.
What? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear. What do you need us to? Just yay?
You are,
Yeah.
you are in favor of approval of the minutes from September?
Yes, I
28th?
am. Mm-hmm.
I'm a yay.
So that's Jackie, Haley, and Ross.
Okay. I thought we had one more online.
Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, we are good to go there. All right, and our newly appointed housing commissioner is not present. Let's get that one. Next up, we have Tiffany Antle, the zoning code manager, to review and discuss upcoming zoning code amendments.
We're doing this from here. Lynn just interrupted.
Yeah, you can do it right. You can put it where it's your notes.
Yes, I'm just gonna do it. Your- Does that work? Yep. Okay, give it a try.
Brianna, online, they can only see a white screen.
How about now?
Just like. If somebody can email me the presentation, I'll share it. I could change the slides to.
I can go online and do it too.
Yeah, could you share it? Thank you. Okay, now we can see the logo online. It's not just white. See all the lovely people. And now we see it. Thank you.
And then how do I move it? You're supposed to be able to. Click it. It's never as easy as it seems. Look at us, Juice. It was off.
All right. I am Tiffany Antal. I'm the zoning code manager in our community development, planning and development services section. I do spend all my fun time working on the zoning code. Today I'm here to present I'm going to present on 3 specific text amendments we're working on currently. I'm going to highlight a couple of others that are walking through the process. Please feel free to interrupt me as you have questions. It can be a little meaty and not interesting information. Okay. 3 amendments. Our first one is looking at adding residential uses into the public facility zone. A little bit. Next is adding minimum parcel lot standards to our manufactured housing zone. And the last one is sort of an overhaul of our planned residential development requirements. So first up is adding residential uses in our public facility zone. So the public facility zone is a unique zoning category within our zoning code. It has a limited number of uses affiliated with it. The reason why we're pursuing this particular amendment now is because in 2022, late 2022, the city council approved a resolution that basically gives our housing division what I like to call first right of refusal on unused city lands. Looking at that though, knowing that a lot of the city properties are in our public facility zone, it sort of makes sense to look at what we allow in that zone. We currently don't allow residential uses except for some very specific ones. So the idea here is that if a piece of land in the public facility zone should come up and is available for housing's use, that it being a permitted use would probably reduce the time frame of getting a development proposal on that site by a year. So rezoning at a minimum takes about a year, and that's if it's not controversial. So our goal here is just to try to speed up. We know that housing can be really sensitive, all of the funding, timeframes, it's always those pressures affiliated with housing projects. So right now, this is still really a pretty small amendment because there really are only 181 parcels in the city of Flagstaff that fall in this zone. The city owns 40% of those. NAU owns almost 30%. And you have to recognize that even though we put zoning on NAU's campus, it doesn't really apply to them. They're not subject to our zoning laws and regulations. Flagstaff Unified School District owns 9%, and then other government or quasi-public agencies own about 12%. And then there's about 10% that do fall under private ownership. I think that the issue with this particular request is that of all of the land uses within the public facility zone, parks is what you find also within the zoning category. So a number of city parks are zoned public facilities. So the immediate reaction of some is clearly your design is to take away parks and replace them with housing. That's not the purpose of this. There are lots of other uses that exist in the public facility zone, including sewer treatment plants. You know, they're both important, both parks and sewer treatment facilities, utility infrastructure, storage tanks, they're all very important to our community. And nobody is looking at going after those community resources. What we're looking at is underutilized pieces of land that the city already owns, what their highest and best use could be. And since the city has directed that housing is looked at first in terms of those underutilized, that's where allowing a residential uses would be a positive. Again, it would be a time saving if and when a developer should show up and have financing ready to go. This could be a possibility. Next up, does anyone have any questions on that one? Next up is lot development standards in our manufactured housing zone. So manufactured housing is currently only allowed in this particular zoning category in Flagstaff. It's not untypical for most municipalities. They regulate manufactured housing differently. But in this particular zoning category, for some reason, when this current zoning code was adopted in 2011, we have a minimum parcel size of 5 acres listed. None of the residential zoning categories have a minimum parcel size of 5 acres. Even our rural residential zones have a minimum of 1 acre. Most zoning districts that are comparable or have development comparable, so this is an example. So there are multiple types of development that can happen in the manufactured home district. First of all, this zoning district does allow for site-built homes. But we have manufactured home subdivisions. There are several throughout town. Mobile Haven here is an example of one. And you will see that its lots range from about 4,500 to 6,000 square feet. So with that being said, when we have minimum lot sizes of 5 acres, there are lots of little small parcels in the MH zone that surround some of these subdivisions still, where there is a possibility of adding in additional units or lots. But that 5 acre minimum is keeping us from doing that. So we're going back to what was under the land development code. Under the land development code, we were allowing manufactured home lots as small as 4,000 square feet. So then in addition to that, we would have minimum lot width and depth standards comparable to that 4,000 square feet, which would be a minimum of 40 feet wide and 100 foot in depth. Manufactured homes typically are skinnier and longer. They have shape dimensions, but they will fit within that 4,000 square foot dimension. Of course, what becomes the regulating factor, like in any other zoning district, is density. So every zoning category has a minimum or maximum of units allowed within the zoning category. This zoning district has the same. So that will become the regulating factor. What we're also proposing to do is remove the 5 acre minimum standard for manufactured home parks as well. The most recent manufactured home park is not far from here. It is on a 2.5 acre parcel. So it was a pre-existing 2.5 acre parcel. We accepted it as legal non-conforming. The tiny home village is technically a manufactured home park. We don't regulate multifamily development in that way. We don't require a minimum lot size that's that big. So a manufactured home park is really no different than a multifamily home development. Basically, it just means that you have more than one home on the same parcel of land. So in this case, it gives more flexibility. If somebody wanted to have a 3, 4, 5 unit manufactured home park, that's now a possibility. And again, what the density standard of the underlying zone will remain. So basically, we're going to treat our manufactured home zone like we treat all the other residential zoning districts in the zoning code. These are super exciting, right? So there you go. This gives greater flexibility for lots within the MH zone to have more than one unit. This last one is the Plan Residential Development Standards. It's a little bit more meaty, a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of just general cleanup as well happening in this particular text amendment. The PRD standards currently require that a development project meet the standards of the transect zones by applying the relevant building placement and form standards, which the code specifically calls out building height and setbacks, and require the use of specific building types as permitted based on their conventional zoning category. So what's important to know about our zoning code is it really is I like to call it a chimera, where it has, there's a normal zoning code, and then built down its spine is another subset of zoning code requirements. Those zoning code requirements primarily apply to areas within the downtown, but we try to find ways initially to sort of spread the joy of the transect zones into other zoning categories. It hasn't worked perfectly. We're trying to fix that in this instance. So what this amendment is proposing to do is to detach the transect zone standards as part of the planned residential development, and instead utilize development standards, using development standards of the conventional zoning district, and you'll see why in a minute. The PRD would be utilized primarily for the development of new subdivisions, and I'll explain why as we go along. The purpose of this is to allow alternative lot area, lot width, lot depth, lot coverage requirements, and setbacks when additional design elements and common spaces are provided. So one of the core features of the transect code is traditional neighborhood design. Traditional neighborhood design is about creating walkable, safe, you might think of it as the downtown feel of development, residential development. So we're trying to take those best elements and still wrap them into this planned residential development option. PRDs are also quite frequently fall under this idea of conservation-based subdivision design, where you're getting a certain percentage of open space and you're allowing flexibility in the design of lots. So you're clustering lots away from maybe an environmentally sensitive portion of a property. Say you have 30 acres, but 10 acres of that 30 acres is steeply sloped. It's still going to allow you to take that. Basically, you're moving the density, you're creating smaller lots on that same parcel of land. So we're still achieving these minimum densities that we're trying to get to within each zoning category. While shopping this amendment, or shopping the idea of this change and meeting with development stakeholders, people who use this tool on the regular, one of the comments that came out was land residential developments require automatically that 15% of the gross site be set aside as open space. But when these developments often have more than 50 units, then they're also required to have civic space, which is another 5%. So now we're talking about 20% of the gross site area has to be set aside. In addition to that, we also have resource protection overlay standards. So for trees, you're looking at saving 50% of the tree points on any particular location. In some cases, you're looking at saving 70 to 80% of the slopes that are on site. And so you can see how that starts to sort of gobble up a particular parcel of land pretty quickly. One of the requests was that we look at doing away with the additional civic space. There are other places in the code where it sort of insinuates that civic space and open space, when required together, should be overlapped. However, where that particular references, it doesn't apply to residential subdivisions, so it's not something we can really use. Additionally, when you have two places or two sections of the code, when they're in conflict with one another, the more strict complies. So generally, when we're doing these types of subdivisions, we've been requiring the 20% set aside. So this proposal would change that. Civic space would be allocated primarily to commercial developments. That 15% goes towards residential developments. Next up is we modify the residential zone allowed use table to clarify when the planned residential development option is required. General cleanup includes eliminating combinations of allowances for the same use. So we have a number of uses in our allowed uses table that will list that it's a permitted and a conditional use permit in the same line, which can be awful confusing to both staff and the public as to which one needs to be pursued. There's generally a footnote that applies to it that you have to refer to, but an example is places of worship. Places of worship that are greater than 250 seats require a conditional use permit, and if they're less than 250 seats, they don't. And so in the same line, it reads like it's permitted and requires conditional use permit. This just cleans us up, lists the uses separately, makes it really clear. So there's just some general cleanup items while we're in there. But when we're trying to delineate what requires a planned residential development, right now, the code requires that co-housing in the R1 zone, duplex and multifamily developments in the RR, the ER, and R1 zones, and single-family dwellings and live-work units in the MR and HR zones require the use of the PRT standards, which in turn requires the use of the transect zone standards. So that sounds great, Tiffany. What's the problem with that? Well, let's talk about that. So this is an example. You have a 7,200 square foot lot in Sunnyside. The owner wants to build a single family dwelling, property zoned medium density residential. Instead of using their development standards, you are now going to use the transect zone standards. I know this might be a little small, but there are big differences between these two sets of standards. So you're talking about developing a parcel infill amongst other already developed parcels with standards that are much different. This creates sort of a uniformity problem. There is an expectation when you have zoning applied to your property that all properties in the same zone are being treated equally. But for individual uses now, and just a handful of them, we all of a sudden start treating them differently. We have not heavily advertised that building height is one of those things that the code specifically allows to change, but you can see the difference, right? 35 feet to 52 feet. It could potentially cause problems. We don't advertise that height a lot. We don't try to encourage that people use the height of the zone. But in addition, the owner would also have to follow standards of a listed building type, of which there are two single family house types. And it calls out sort of that base bulk and width of what the building needs to be. So it really limits sort of that flexibility of what you can develop on the lot. The transect zones are really meant to be very urban. They're great standards. They create wonderful projects. I'm gonna give you an example here. Now, I love this building, 100% love this building. This is actually a Housing Solutions project. It is 100% affordable. The reason I pulled this is because I just happen to have this in my file, but it's more just to show the differential. So this building comes much closer to the street where the existing homes nearby are much further back. The lot coverage is very significantly different than the homes nearby. It would be easier to just go in and adjust the standards of the MR zone. It's not saying that this is inappropriate or that we shouldn't be going along this lines in terms of lots, because we probably want to get to a place where we're starting to max out density. But it just needs to be done uniformly is all. But this is still a really great project because Carl Eberhardt would make me say that. And next up, this amendment also does some other fun things to implement removing those requirements. So now what would happen is if you wanted to build that single family home in the MR zone, you would just follow the MR zone standards. You'd meet the same setbacks as your neighbors did. essentially allow the same development. We fix the commercial zone tables, we fix other little pieces in the code. We also delete another use called cluster dwelling, which is basically the exact same thing as what a PRD does, only it has much stricter standards to it. You have to create much bigger lots. So nobody chooses this option. So there's just no point to it. So our code is really big. Right now, it requires a small pack animal to carry that code around. So making it skinnier is fine by us. Okay. So here's kind of the meat of what now gets required. So it's an incentive process. For a new subdivision, you can use reduced setbacks. You can get larger lot coverage. We are not changing building height at all, so we're very clear about that. All of this can be done through a subdivision plat. Every lot in that subdivision would have the same standards applied to it, but you have to, as a developer, you have to agree to a certain set of design elements. So what we've done is we've created a menu of options. Each option has a point value affiliated with it, and your project needs to incorporate design elements that add up to at least 5. Okay, so these elements include subdivisions with 10% of all residential units as category 1 affordable housing. 5 points, you're done. PRD was always designed to allow for affordable housing projects, so we kept that, maintained that here. Next up are street networks that include alleys, and at least 50% of all lots within the subdivision having alley access. So alleys are a street network system that go along with gridded streets that really do support traditional neighborhood design. A lot of the Transect code really focused on trying to get developments with alleys. I've not been successful in the time I've worked here ever getting a project to have an alley. Developers don't love them. It requires additional right-of-way, takes additional land. When you put in roads, they automatically count towards your resource reductions. So the fewer roads make developers happy, because to them it's just burning resources for no reason. 100% of residential units are all electric. So A and C are taking into account that we're both in a housing crisis and that we are trying to be mindful of carbon neutrality. When I met with sustainability, I had originally granted this 5 points as well. Sustainability looked at it and said, there's so many other great features on this table. We would hate for somebody to walk away with it all if they just did 100% electric. We'd still want to see these other features implemented. Well, all of these other features include things like the average dwelling units are no larger than 1,800 square feet, not including the garage. Smaller homes don't always equate to cheaper homes or more affordable homes, but they sure do help a little bit. So the goal here is not just to create smaller lots to put bigger houses on smaller lots. A street network that connects at right angles to the greatest extent feasible. So this is another way of saying a gridded street network, but understanding that the world is not flat. So we're saying it in a softer way. Blocks may not exceed 600 feet in length. This is really important for bike and ped transportation, having blocks that make sense for alternative modes of transportation. Significant traffic calming design features, detached garages located behind the primary structure. This is a big one. How much a garage takes up of a front facade equates to how many driveways you have on that street, and that's all of the interactions that a pedestrian is going to face on a sidewalk, is all of those driveways. All residential units within the subdivision include a minimum 80 square foot front entry feature. That's a holdover from the Transect code. There's lots of belief. I don't know if any of you are Jane Jacobs fans, but eyes on the street are always a good thing. Subdivision incorporates combination of single family, duplex, or multifamily units. So we're trying to get a mix of uses. We're trying to incorporate that missing middle of development, and not just have subdivisions that are just end over end of detached single family homes. The provision of recreational amenities, at least 50% of the required resources are maintained in common spaces outside of individual lots, so that homeowners aren't faced with dealing with a tree that's too close to their house, or having to struggle with a dead, dying, or damaged tree, and the city saying you can't cut it down. Front setbacks less than 15 feet for livable portions of the dwelling unit, including the front entry feature. That's also a traditional neighborhood design element. Attached street facing garages less than 50% of the width of the primary structure. Subdivision CCNRs and setback standards do not prohibit the development of accessory dwelling units. This is one I've heard is problematic when subdivisions prohibit the development of ADUs. A minimum of 15% of all of the single family dwelling units include the requirements for an ADU, meaning that at least 15% of those units are going to include an ADU. So if we can't get that mixed density, hopefully we're going to get some ADUs. The subdivision exceeds the minimum density of the applicable zoning district. I've watched a couple of subdivisions come in as late and they're just not hitting the minimum. They're not hitting minimum densities. They have development agreements that allow them to balance densities across their overall development, which is a good thing, especially when you have to deal with tough resources. But when you see it consistently, because we just want a larger lot, it becomes worrisome. And then subdivisions include pedestrian environments, including outdoor seating. So the goal is that we're not applying different zoning standards, but we're requiring the things that we're really truly wanting out of these developments. I just want to point out, we've got two other code amendments going forward. One is changing open space terminology. This was at the request of Open Spaces Commission. We have a problem of calling everything open space in the code. We have development standards that require open space, for example, and then there's the open space that is Observatory Mesa and Picture Canyon, and it gets confusing for folks. So this is 100% terminology cleanup. And we're working on that, and that's going through public hearing now. And then we are also changing our definitions for neighborhood and regional meeting facilities. Became pretty apparent that we actually don't have a use that allows convention or meeting centers. So we needed to fix that in the code. If you're ever interested, all of the zoning code text amendments are working their way through the public process. They're posted on the city's website, so you can access those amendments if you're interested. And then our schedule coming up is to hit public hearing November 8th and city council November 21st. I will caveat that the residential uses in the PF zone needs to go to the Parks and Rec Commission. So I wasn't able to get to them first, which was my ultimate goal. So that particular amendment will need to get delayed after their meeting in 11/20, but hopefully it'll be completed by beginning of next year. If you have any questions, happy to try to answer them.
Folks online, if you would put a C or a Q, we are monitoring that chat and we'll make sure we have it right now.
So on the manufactured home piece, are those developments including where it's rented for leased land and owned land, or is it just one or the other?
It's both.
So on the one you just finished presenting,
PRD.
You showed a project Northern Arizona, or Housing Solutions Northern Arizona project. I was a little bit confused what the criticism was, and would these changes make that kind of project more difficult or impossible to do going forward?
So what this would require is that you meet the development standards of the underlying zoning district. This property is actually zoned community commercial. So it requires a conditional use permit, requires a PRD. You wouldn't have to do the transect zone standards. So it's going to give you the same lot coverage, the same setbacks, and the same building height as what's surrounding you. So the issue here is about uniformity and about the vulnerability of what we have going on here. So what I will tell you is, it's just between you and me. We're basically administratively approving totally different zoning standards.
I will say on the other two, just to throw that comment out there, I'm definitely supportive of those amendments. The one for adding housing as a permitted use in a public facility zone, anything that reduces the timeline involved in creating housing. It does seem like there's adequate protection against those initial concerns about losing park space. So that's a thumbs up for me. And as for the reducing the minimum parcel size in the manufactured housing zone, manufactured housing is one of the more affordable housing options. So anything that makes that easier is also a thumbs up for me. I'm still kind of digesting some of the stuff in the third one.
Sure.
But I think I'm overall supportive. You know, what else to throw the thoughts out there.
I think what you have to recognize is that these are incremental changes.
Yeah.
And it's meant to set that uniformity standard, but that as you're gonna learn about other projects, we're gonna look at what our other code standards are and if they do need to be changed holistically.
Does non-uniformity generate a lot of complaints?
Yes.
Okay, because like I personally, non-uniformity, oh well, that's life. But if it is something that generates a lot of complaints, I can see why.
Yes, the neighbor was, I mean, as much as I love that project, I very much remember handling that project. And the neighbor that was parked in front was not happy. Because that project is fairly significant in relation to the size and scale of the house on your property.
And the uniformity you're talking about just means that the other properties don't on either side of it, but have to.
Uniformity meaning that all properties within the same zoning district are treated consistently in the same. So when you want to stray from the standards of the zone, then you're looking at variances. It's sort of awkward to insert a different zoning standard into the process. So in this case, you know, they probably got greater lot coverage in some instances. In other cases, it just makes it can make it really difficult to meet all of those development standards.
Does the non-uniformity make things more difficult for you?
Yes. Yes,
Okay, I can definitely get behind that reasoning.
makes me sweat. There you go.
Any other feedback? Okay.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Okay, next up, we have the review and discussion on the building and property care standards and associated amendments to the littering and abandoned vehicle chapters. I understand that you have a member of the public that would like to address the commission.
Give me 1 second. 1 second. It'll be, is it for this item? Okay, it'll be after the research.
So I've got some handouts that I printed out for house last week, so I'm not forcing you to take paper. If you want to take paper, copy of these, you can. We have 3 different topics that we're going to go over here. Good afternoon. My name is Dan Folk. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. Very pleased to be here. I'm going to be presenting on a topic that we've been working on for a couple of years. There's some history to it. We're calling it the Building and Property Care Standards. And as I was preparing for today, I decided, well, let me pull out our 10-year housing plan and see what's the connection between this topic of building and property care and what we're trying to achieve with the 10-year housing plan. So of course, under preserve, I just love our create, connect, preserve, protect. You know, under preserve 2, expand efforts to preserve existing housing stock. And we have a specific preserve 2.1, continue home ownership rehabilitation programs and create an affordable rental rehabilitation program with a focus on establishing safe, decent, and sustainable housing. So I do believe this, these standards I'm going to present today and some of the amendments really fit in well with that goal, which is about trying to preserve our existing housing stock for places for people to live.
Is it not doing it?
Which button do I?
You're doing it, but it's just not doing it right. Give me 1 second.
All right. So while Adriana's getting me on the right slide here, I'll just give you a little overview. So I'm going to give a little history on property care standards. They're commonly known as property maintenance ordinances. And then we're going to go through the draft building and property care standards, which is one of the handouts, some proposed amendments to the littering section, and then proposed amendments to the abandoned vehicle section.
Sorry,
Low
Danny,
term,
just
what's
one
the,
second.
There it goes.
We're not going to do a quiz on what Tiffany presented, so we're back to the zoning code. No, but really, all these amendments that Tiffany presented too also really tie in really well with your 10-year housing plan. I believe you could go through that plan and look at some of the policies and goals, and I think we're addressing it with some of these code amendments. I'll just go ahead and talk through some of these slides, maybe that are more housekeeping type slides.
We're on.
Are we on?
Board. Yep.
So for the law,
What do you mean?
we're still on field trip. Apologies for the text. This was supposed to be set up for us. No,
Can I borrow that? You're clicking at my computer.
All right, so some of the folks who helped out with this project, it's been a multi-year project. We had a series of community meetings in the summer of 2022. The League of Neighborhoods has been very involved. Jesse Dominguez is here today. Here we are.
there it is. And
Want to go to the next one?
Here you go. Yep, we're good.
Which button do I use?
This one or that
Okay.
one?
Awesome. All right, so I told you what you're going to be hearing about. I wanted to present this quote. Tiffany mentioned Jane Jacobs, who's considered kind of a planning legend, even though she wasn't a city planner. One that I learned about when I was in planning school, Norman Krumholtz, he's considered kind of the father of equity planning. And so it's not enough for cities to be beautiful and efficient. They could and should be just and fair as well. And planners should work toward human betterment. And that certainly ties in with this topic today. So starting to tell you about our project team, Tiffany's been a key part of it. Reggie Eccleston, our code compliance manager, Kevin Finsel in the city attorney's office, myself and Mark Retz, our historic preservation and neighborhood. And so why are we considering this now? There is some history of a property maintenance ordinance in Flagstaff. Back in 2012, just before I started with the city, there was an effort to adopt what I would call a traditional property maintenance ordinance. And you can get these right off the shelf. This is published by the International Code Council. It's a property maintenance code. And it was very close to being adopted, but my understanding is kind of a large community pushback right at the end, largely about these are HOA type rules, homeowner association type rules. And so ultimately that council in 2012 did not adopt it. Back in 2020, one of the council members put a future agenda item on, which was, again, let's take this topic up and let's look at it. We also had a letter from the League of Neighborhoods, which is La Plaza Vieja, South Side and Sunnyside, asking that we take this topic up again. I mentioned the working group meetings in the summer of 2022. These were really just open public meetings. I called it a working group, but they were not designated members. We held, I think, 4 of these meetings over at the Murdoch Center. We went through all these different topics that are typically in a property maintenance ordinance and tried to find a direction to move forward with that working group. And then we've had a series of city council work sessions, the last one being just this last Tuesday. So what is a property maintenance ordinance? Kind of as right in the name of the title, it's codes for the maintaining of the maintenance of land and buildings. And it really focuses on life and safety issues. Accumulation of garbage and debris is a topic that's commonly covered. Any kind of hazardous condition, deteriorating structures, and then abandoned properties and vehicles, which we do have a number of those Flagstaff. Some of the considerations that really almost any of the work we do nowadays in our code, whether it's the zoning code or other sections, we obviously want to consider the 2 declared emergencies, and that's why we're here today to talk about how this could contribute, I think, to the housing emergency. Climate, neighborhood and heritage preservation. So social equity is really key to this. There is a history in this country of using these types of rules to displace low-income folks and low-income neighborhoods, combined with urban renewal, which was a really popular tool in the 60s and 70s. These urban renewal projects combined with maintenance codes were they were meant to spur economic development. And really, when you look back at the history of it, really what it did was displaced lower income folks, and it didn't have the economic effect that was kind of promised. So again, we want to be careful with this. One of the words that's associated with urban renewal is blight. You will not see blight in any of our codes, because it is kind of a loaded word, again, associated with displacing folks who don't have a lot of options. And then the health and safety of neighborhoods. So we did a survey back in 2022 to generate interest, try to get some folks involved in the process, but also identify what are the topics that you care most about. So you can see the ones that had the most identified as the most important: general junk accumulation, general debris accumulation, very similar to the first one, trash and waste, building deterioration was number 4. And so again, a big focus on the exterior properties and accumulation of what we call litter. And so it kind of validated that there is interest in doing this. Other concerns that came through the survey, these were in some of the written comments, and things that we need to be aware of as we proceed through this, is that to ensure that we don't have inequitable impacts. Obviously, households have different abilities to comply. You find a lot of people that Reggie talks to, they would love to fix up their property, but they just don't have the resources. They don't have the income. So we need to be mindful of that. Existing ordinances are in place, and so when we went through the working group sessions, we kept coming back to our existing code, and a lot of the topics covered in these standard maintenance ordinances are in other parts of our city code. And so we ended up including that into our solution, relying on some of our existing codes. Concerns about subjectivity of applying these standards. That's something we always have to be aware of with any kind of code. All codes, I think, are open to some subjectivity, but consistency and uniformity, as Tiffany was talking about, is very important in the application of codes. And then the last thing that, even as I talk to people just casually and mentioning this topic, the first thing they say to me is, that sounds like an HOA. So we still got comments and concerns that we don't want to be too overbearing, put too many constraints or restrictions on our property owners. And so where we landed was create a simple approach, something very clear for the buildings and land, and support with our existing code. So that's why we have some amendments on littering and abandoned vehicles tracking along with this new language. We included an appendix which gives guidance on how to meet these standards, how to maintain your property. We've committed to continuing to work with the League of Neighborhoods. And then also there's a lot of interest in creating a property care program. So this idea that folks who don't have the resources to maintain their property, there could be a grant program, something the city administers. We've talked to city council about this. And so I think after this is adopted, I'm confident it will be adopted. You may see a budget request in the next cycle to start a program to try to help people maintain their property and invest in Flagstaff. All right, so here we are. These are the new standards. This is one of the handouts. I've highlighted words. That's my own emphasis added just to kind of help this discussion. And so again, really the purpose of these rules are to improve and maintain the appearance of Flagstaff, improve the quality of life by protecting public health, safety, and welfare. These will apply to all residential and non-residential buildings and property. The intent was really important as well to the working group. Applied and enforced fairly and consistently. That's that uniformity. Provide adequate notice to affected owners, resolve conditions. The city may provide resources to assist owners with compliance as they're available. So this is this idea of creating a program where there may be assistance available. We really looked at the definitions. Our code is full of definitions that are very long and kind of precise. what happens is a code writer is you try to kind of anticipate any kind of situation and let's address it in the definition. And we've taken a very different approach here. We're doing very simple definitions that really come right out of the dictionary. So again, debris, the remains of something broken down or destroyed. Litter, we're going to go through that one. Trash, waste paper, debris, garbage, and untidy accumulation of objects. So again, trying to simplify things. And then here we get into the standards for property itself. The first one deals with having adequate container capacity for your garbage, right? So having the proper number of bins, or if it's a multi-family project, maybe you need a dumpster. This is something Reggie and his code compliance team work on a lot. Keeping properties free of accumulation of litter, trash, debris, and garbage. Again, we've defined these terms, and this is just, again, kind of the number one issue I would say we hear about. Inoperable equipment, vehicles, and appliances shall not be stored where they're in public view. And again, we're going to go through the abandoned vehicle section. There's some specific standards on where you can store these types of inoperable equipment and vehicles. So for example, if you had a washing machine that was sitting in your front yard, we would ask them to move it out of view into the backyard, into a garage, somewhere where you can't see it from public right. Fourth one deals with just more general hazards in general. So it could be something like chemicals, or talks about dead and damaged trees. So brush and growth and things like that create a hazard. And then unoccupied properties, if they're not occupied and they're really abandoned, then they need to be posted on trespassing. This is to help with the police department, with the owner, keeping people from trespassing and really breaking into structures. So those are the standards for property. And then the next one is for buildings and structures themselves. All right. So what do we do to maintain structures so that they can, people can live in them and they're part of our housing stock? In this case, it also applies to commercial. So the first one deals with windows and doors shall be maintained in proper working condition. When damaged, you can temporarily put in security measures. And we had a starting point here of 30 days. So it says temporary security measures may be installed for no more than 30 days. But I'll give you a little extra background on this. So right now, you can essentially board up a building indefinitely. And it's really what a building code. And so it talks about dangerous buildings. And what it says is you just need to secure the property. And so that could be boarding up the windows and doors, putting a fence around it. Properties that have been abandoned for a long period of time, our compliance teams constantly going back because people break into these places, they're swatting, doing things that are dangerous, potentially to the property, to the neighborhood, starting fires, instances of that happening. So the idea with a maintenance code is that there should be some defined time frame, right? It shouldn't be indefinite. And so as a staff, we said, let's start with 30 days because there's a lot of time and resources that go into trying to manage these properties and get a hold of the property owners. You know, standard property maintenance code would say 180 days, so 6 months. And after 6 months of being boarded up, then you have to put back in real doors and windows. And so we were at council on Tuesday night and they gave direction on this. I asked for input and they've recommended 90 days. So I've not updated the slide, but at this point, council is recommending that folks would have 90 days to do those temporary security measures. And then you'd have to put back real doors and windows. So I'm interested on the input on that from this group today. The second one again is about maintaining to prevent deterioration and maintain the appearance of the property. And then the last one again is about unoccupied buildings and properly posting them. So those are the actual standards. It was important to the working group that there be some exemptions. This is really in response to some of the natural disasters we've had, flooding, fires and flooding. We understand there's situations where people will have to have things out in their yard or cleaning up as they're repairing their home. And so the city can suspend these rules. So those are the new building and property care standards. Now I'm going to go into a couple of amendments. Pause for a second. Are there any questions or comments on that information I just went through? It's a lot in there.
Yes. On 706-001-5 building and property care standards, section A4. Does that include the sidewalk in front of this property. Subjectively, that's the biggest issue I see is bushes and other things making the sidewalk impassable.
So it does, it wouldn't necessarily be out of this section of the code because this applies to private property. Most sidewalks are in the public right of way, and we do have sections that sidewalks need to be kept clear. So our code team we do contact property owners when there's bushes or shrubs or something blocking the sidewalk. We contact them and have them trim it back. That's in a different section of our code. It deals with streets and public rights of way.
Okay, so not an issue.
It's very similar. So the tree might be on private property and maybe it's encroaching out over the sidewalk. So you could use either one of these probably for that. But when it's a sidewalk obstruction, we use that sidewalk section.
If the property owner decided to demolish the building instead of putting back in windows and doors, would the permitting for that be included in that 9 days, or would that be outside of the?
So there is a way to mitigate like a dangerous building. You can take it down. We have a demolition permit. It's a pretty simple permit. It's not quite over the counter, but gets reviewed by a few people, but it's probably a 1 to 3 day permit for demolition. Yeah, it's pretty simple. You know, it depends as part of it too. If it's in the historic district, it might be an extra level of review, but in general, it's a simple permit to get. Anything else on these? Go ahead and move into littering. So this is one of the sections we're recommending changes to work really in concert with these new building and property care standards. So right now we have a whole section on littering. We're recommending repealing the entire section. It's in Title VI, which are the police regulations. We're recommending it be placed in Title VII, which is health and sanitation, which is where these property care standards will be located. We've redone all the definitions. I gave you some examples earlier. And so if you look at our current section on littering, there's these very technical long definitions that are like maybe 2 inches in font, in print. Talks about protrusible and non-protrusible waste. Can anyone help me out here what protrusible is or non-protrusible waste? And so again, we've done very simple definitions. I gave you examples earlier. So we think this is going to help us quite a bit. We're repealing sections that we feel are just unnecessary. And again, as mentioned earlier, we like to put our code on the slim fast plan. We're trying to shrink it a little bit. And then again, have consistent penalties and process. Some of these sections have their own penalty section, and we're really trying to rely on the civil penalty section that applies. And so that's like a high level overview. I've given you the text of the proposed new chapter on littering. The other section we looked at was abandoned vehicles. And so this is another one that we get a lot of calls on. So what we've done is number one, we're recommending changing the language from abandoned vehicle to inoperable vehicle. And this will help us with some consistency with some of the state statutes. We've created new definitions of what an inoperable vehicle is, as well as what we call sheltered storage. And so inoperable vehicles, essentially they don't function or they're not registered. They'd also be considered inoperable. They don't have current tags. What we've said is they need to be in sheltered storage. And so sheltered storage is in a garage, a carport, it's in a driveway, it needs to be covered if it's inoperable. Or it can be in a yard or side or backyard, as long as it's again screened from the front street, from the public right of way. So we've identified, I think, pretty clearly where those can be located, and then again, penalties and process. We also were going to look at the section on nuisances. And this chapter of our code is really about what I call abandoned buildings. So this nuisance section is dangerous buildings, abandoned buildings. We have a section right now that has a process that city council can implement, or 3 residents can come forward and ask that a property be looked at. And it talks about the fire chief and the city engineer and a health official going out, doing a report, bringing that report back to council. Council can cause an order, then the owner's notified, and there's a certain amount of time to abate the dangerous condition. And so the idea was, let's look at this section along with our building code and our housing code, and can we get rid of one of them? And so for now, after the analysis, let's keep both where they are. We really can't, I was thinking we could maybe replace this nuisance section with what's in our building code, but they're so different. The building code is very technical. We need to keep that in place. We do use that a lot for dangerous buildings. And so my suggestion on this is that we make a few amendments to this after we adopt these, what I'm presenting today. And there would probably be identifying who are the proper staff to go out and evaluate a nuisance building. And then who can initiate a report on it. I'm going to recommend staff be empowered to initiate a report. It doesn't have to be council or a citizen. So those might be coming shortly after we complete this round. And then here's the schedule. It has changed a little bit. We did our work session earlier this week. Commission on Inclusion and Adaptive Living had a long agenda yesterday, so it got bumped. So I'm going to come back to them in November. Here we are at the Housing Commission today. What this will do is we are going to come back to council and report on the 14th, but I'll probably move my first read on this to December 5th, and we'll probably do the second read at the second regular meeting in December. So we're looking to have this adopted by the end of this calendar year. I believe those are my slides. So really appreciate your time today. Do you have any input on any of this information or other questions?
Actually, before we take Commissioner input, we can remember.
Oh, yes.
Like to speak on this issue.
Jesse? Come on up, Jesse.
And then we'll take Commissioner feedback.
You like I'm in church or something. I represent the Pasadena Neighborhood Association, and I also represent the League of Neighborhoods. We've been working on trying to get a property maintenance ordinance since 1905 or 6. I don't remember. But anyways, it's one of those that was a hit and miss, and I think Dan has done a fantastic job the way he approached it. It's not to be the big brother trying to beat up somebody, or let's kick out the little elderly lady because her rose bush is 2 inches too tall. It is about helping our neighbors. And that's one of the things that I am really happy that Dan has proposed, is that there be a pot of money to help our neighbors. So on behalf of the League of Neighborhoods and the Plaza Vieja neighborhood, we totally support this program. So I'm hoping that the commission looks forward, pushes it forward for us. Any questions?
Can I have your full name for the minute?
What's that?
Can I have your full name for the
Oh,
minute?
I forgot. Yeah. My name is Jose Dominguez, also known as Jeff Dominguez. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Do we have Commissioner feedback? Let me go first to the folks online.
No comment, Commissioner Bowman.
All right, go in the room.
I guess mine is more about the changed vehicles and what's considered abandoned or junked or whatever term we want to use. If somebody's currently repairing or working on it, that's their primary means of transportation. This is something where the city has discretion on whether they're choosing to enforce, as long as it's continuing, as long as the owner is continuing to attempt to fix it, understanding that they don't have the economic resources to achieve that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really how the exemption clause was considered, but I will tell you, we encounter this a lot today, even under our current rules. And so under this proposal, you could keep that vehicle in the driveway. If you're repairing it in your driveway, we would just ask you to cover it. So maybe the blue tarp. We have a lot of debate. Aesthetically, what's, I don't know, what's better or less offensive, a blue tarp over a car, or the car sitting there in various states of disrepair? But this would basically require you to cover the vehicle if it wasn't operable.
So it's a relatively simple thing.
It is. You can keep it in your driveway if you're repairing it. Yeah, just cover it when you're in between working on it. And that's really what we do now.
I have a question. Is there some maximum number of inoperable vehicles that somebody could have?
We've not listed a maximum number. There are folks with a lot of vehicles on their property. It's a real challenge. A mix of some are operable, some are not operable. So even parking vehicles that people use is an issue too, right? You'll see front yards full of vehicles. It's really not allowed per the code. And it's another section we're going to be working on. But there is no limit. That's the short answer. As long as they're stored appropriately.
Where would the money come from for that pot we were referring to earlier?
So it would probably be a general fund request through our budget process. We'll ask for a little bit of money to get a program started. But I'm assuming it would come from the general fund. Anything else? All right, well, thank you so much again for providing some time for us today. If you think of anything else, don't hesitate to contact me. I think that's it.
Okay, for our next item, which is the homeless shelter and services funds allocation recommendation. Requesting a motion to forward to the ranking committee's recommendations for homeless shelter and services funds allocations to the city council with the recommendation for approval. I would like to recuse myself from this discussion as I am listed, and I would ask if there are any other commissioners that have a conflict that would also need to recuse themselves at this time.
I have a question. This is Haley. Do I need to recuse myself since I was on the ranking committee?
No,
Okay.
thank you for asking. And I don't know if Ross is listening, but she will need to
Yes,
recuse
I'm
herself.
here.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I will be recusing
At
myself.
this point, I would like to turn it over to the discussion or go meeting to Commissioner Denham.
And yeah, I'll happily do that. Second.
I'm sorry, this is Ross. I'm having a hard time hearing and I want to make sure, do I need to get off of the call altogether?
No. Can you hear me okay now, Ross?
Yes, I can. I just couldn't hear the chair and some of the conversation, so I just didn't want to be like sitting here and y'all be waiting for me to jump off. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have four.
Thank you, by the way, for taking over this.
Yeah, no problem. So as the chair already introduced the topic, this is consideration of a motion on the homeless shelter and service funds allocation recommendations that came from the ranking committee. Just to frame up this agenda item, at the end, we are going to make a motion, and that's either going to be to forward the ranking committee's recommendations as they are, to forward the ranking committee's recommendations with alterations that we may discuss, or to not forward at all. So yeah, that should frame the conversation, and then I'll turn it over to Christine Hudwood, who is the Housing and Grants Administrator, for the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here today so we can talk about this. As Tyler or Chair Denham said, I'm Christine Pavlik. We're going to be talking about these funding recommendations for programs that are eligible for some homeless shelter and services funds that were provided by the Arizona Department of Housing. Do you need me to tell you when I want the next slide? Do you want the clicker today? No. Thank you. And I just push. Oh, easy. Yeah. The first time I've used the clicker. Is it not doing it? Is it on? Sorry to be a problem child. So I'll just kind of give some background and I'll choose it to forward the slides. But in May, the Arizona Department of Housing released a notice of funding availability for homeless shelter and services funds. These are specifically for programs that provide shelter and services to unsheltered persons who are experiencing homelessness. The funds were to be prioritized for programs serving unsheltered persons who were impacted by one of the following challenges. Is it working now? Mm-hmm. Awesome. The first one is the ruling on Freddie Brown et al. Versus the city of Flagstaff. This was a court decision to clear and clean the zone down in Phoenix. I don't know if anybody's unfamiliar. The zone was a very large homeless encampment that when they cleared that out, it really impacted a lot of persons experiencing homelessness. The second challenge was the expiration of the Public Health Act, Title 42, as it pertained to the border between Arizona and Mexico. This was the act that was allowing our border patrol to turn folks back and not allow them into the United States. So the idea was that there would be an influx of undocumented individuals in our state because of the expiration of that. And then the closure of sober living homes and residential facilities. So if you're not familiar with this one, there was a situation where the Arizona Attorney General's office began investigating access-funded sober living homes, and they actually found a great deal of fraud. The services that they purported to provide to individuals in these facilities were not being provided, and a lot of these individuals were being almost bullied and really victimized and taken to these facilities so that folks could claim that they were serving them with certain services and recoup those funds. So because of this, many facilities were forced to close and actually left hundreds of individuals and overwhelmingly Indigenous persons homeless and unsheltered. So we were made available of this notice of funding availability about 3 days before the application was due. So the funds were only available to municipalities. The Arizona Department of Housing often will have subrecipients that are service providers, nonprofits, but for these funds, I think because of the expedited way they wanted to get them out into the communities, they chose to only award to municipalities. And so we understood how important that was to our local service providers, that we get these funds into Flagstaff, that we don't miss this opportunity. And so we were able to scramble together an application, and we were successful in receiving $840,000. Those funds are allowable for activities that include operating support of shelters, motel and hotel vouchers, supportive services, and other quick occupancy housing solutions. So, sorry, I'm trying to forward my notes too. So as you'll see here, you can see our total that we've received, and then we've broken it down between city administration and indirect and program-related expenses. So the program-related expenses are the funds we have available for community partners. Now, the city's indirect rate for our current fiscal year is actually a little over 25 or 26%, and $140,000 is a little under 17%. And it's standard for us to typically utilize 20% of any grant funding for administrative and indirect costs. The city incurs a lot of costs when it comes to managing subrecipient contracts and being responsible for these funds. So we released a NOFA to the community on September 20th. Applications were due back to the city October 10th. The ranking committee met earlier this week, and we discussed applications. The ranking committee provides funding recommendations. And that committee typically includes a couple of city staff persons with specialized knowledge of social services or grants and contracts, maybe finance. We also include a housing commissioner, and we're always looking for volunteers, by the way, if folks want to volunteer. And then a member of the public or two, this time we just had one, who has expertise in grant funding or social services or perhaps finance. The city staff utilizes the recommendations of the ranking committee, and we meet as staff afterwards, and we make final funding recommendations that we are bringing today. So our recommendations are not far off from what the ranking committee had indicated that they would like to see. Sometimes staff has different knowledge than the ranking committees do, and we will tweak our recommendations just a little bit. So our next step would be to take these funding agreements to city council for final approval, but we always bring them to the commission first for your comments and a motion to recommend to council that they be approved. So on this slide, you can see the proposals that we received, and I'll just go through them quickly. Catholic Charities requested $144,920 for their Cedar Rose shelter, as well as for their PATH outreach program. So this would be operations and salaries for their shelter, and it would also be programmatic costs and salaries for their outreach program, where they're actually going out and finding unsheltered individuals. And that includes some motel hotel vouchers.
Northland Family Help Center operates a youth shelter, and they've requested $100,000 for staff salaries so that they can increase capacity of clients served. They really saw their numbers dip down during the pandemic, and now they are rising back up. And they purport to serve 65 unique individuals this coming year. Then Flagstaff Shelter Services has requested $550,000 for salaries and operation expenses for 3 separate shelter sites. One is their congregate shelter and then 2 motel shelters. Community action teams of Flagstaff requested a little under $100,000 for their mobile outreach and shower bus program. So they have a bus that they park in different areas of the community, and that has the shower on it and allows unsheltered persons to be able to access that shower. And while they're there, they also receive sometimes healthcare, other services, referrals, as well as they operate what's called the People at Work program, which is a city-funded program where they will actually pay individuals to help with picking up litter throughout the town. But the funds would be primarily for referrals and case management for unsheltered persons. And then we had Homeless Youth Connection request $50,000 for salaries in order to provide support services to youth experiencing homelessness. These youth are always working to complete their high school diploma. That's the part of the eligibility for their program. And then Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona requested a little over $279,000 for operational support and salaries for their transitional housing programs at both JoJo's Place and Sharon Manor. So also on this chart, you can see the number of clients or bed nights each organization estimates they'll serve. And then it's also important to note that our funding requested amount is much greater than our funding availability amount, and that happens pretty much every time we put out NOFAs to the community. There is always more need than we are able to meet. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh boy. So this slide actually shows the request amount along with the average scores from the ranking committee. The ranking committee opted to fully fund the first 3 highest ranking proposals and then partially fund the following 3. So you can see actually that the scores for all of them are really close. It's not always the case, but in this instance, all of the applicants were found to be eligible for funding and with very compelling projects. You know, we rank not only to make sure that it's competitive, but also to make sure that we're not awarding funds to organizations that aren't capable of meeting the requirements. Like we have very high standards. We want to make sure that we're being really responsible with these funds. So in this case, all of these organizations proved themselves to be eligible and have compelling projects that the ranking committee felt were important to fund. So because of this, the committee determined that Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona and Catholic Charities should receive the minimum amounts necessary that were indicated in their application. So as you can see, that's $150,000 out of 279 and 100,000 out of 144,000, almost 145,000 for those 2 applications. And then Flagstaff Shelter Services didn't indicate a minimum request, so the ranking committee suggested that they then receive the remaining funds that were available after all of these applications were considered. While it's much less than half of their requested amount, it is still the largest allocation provided by these funds. And we know that Flag Shelter Services serves an incredible amount of individuals and provides a great service to our community. So we didn't feel that the difference in 1 point meant they shouldn't be funded. They did feel it was necessary to fully fund from the highest, or they did not feel it was necessary to fully fund from the highest down, which sometimes we will do, where we'll just max out all of these requests. And then if there is anything left, they might get some, or we might add it to higher scoring ones. But again, the scores are so close that it really didn't feel appropriate to do that. So we were able to ensure that all of the service providers would receive funding to support their programs, and really quite a bit of funding. So I'm available to answer any questions you might have about our process or these organizations or their programs. We're really hoping to take these recommendations to City Council as soon as possible, so that we can make sure these funds are in our community making a difference as soon as we possibly can.
That's the public comments online.
Okay, read my mind there. Do we have any comments or questions from the other commissioners? And if you're online, just to see your queue in the chat, I'll call on you.
I would be curious as to how often does that funding become available? When you apply, like how often do you apply for that?
Is this one-time funding? That's a great question. So I believe that because of those pretty extreme challenges that I mentioned at the beginning, the Arizona Department of Housing worked with the governor and some of our legislators to use appropriations, not from this year's budget, but from last year's budget. So they actually technically gave us the funds in fiscal year 23, and then we're giving them out for fiscal year 24. So I think it was really just, you know, not luck, but because there was this urgent need and there was funding available, the state was able to make it work out. And every once in a while, you know, we'll have kind of random funds pop up that we're eligible for, but it's not actually that common, right, Sarah and Justina, lately? It's pretty unusual. And they would usually make them available to nonprofits, and we wouldn't step in to be a middleman if that's the case. In this case, we stepped in because there was no other option for our nonprofit partners to apply for these funds.
We don't think using the term blue moon,
Okay. Yeah, once in a blue moon.
it's a very rare opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, yeah. All right.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Give a moment. And if not, does anyone want to make a motion to, and let me reference this actually.
There. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Your words are not, okay, thank you. I'm like, your words are not computing. Not as a commissioner. It would have to, yeah, usually it would come within, but public comment, we don't usually respond to questions. So, but since she's recused herself from this item due to a conflict of interest, she does not have the ability to perform as a commissioner and ask a question during discussion.
Let's do a last call for public comments, and then if she wants to give a comment, that's fine, but we can't. Sarah said.
In case it was hard to hear us, it was determined that we'll call again for public comment, and you can do public comment, but we're not able to answer any questions.
Terrific. It's just a clarifying question.
Sure, go for it, or you.
Yeah, so I'll open this up to last call for public comment. If you are commenting as a member of the public, make sure to state your full name for the record. And there's one other bit to state there, isn't there? No, actually, we can address because this is the agenda. Yeah, so if you'd like to make public comment, go ahead and unmute yourself and state your full name and then make your comment.
Okay, can I go ahead and go?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is Ross Schaefer. I'm the executive director of Flagstaff Shelter Services, and obviously I'm not trying to represent myself as a commissioner at this moment in time. I am interested in knowing, when will the public comment forum be for feedback to this process and to the ranking? Like, is that happening at a specific council meeting to ask questions about this? So that's part of my public comment. And I guess the other piece that I would have is just an interest in understanding if this funding is meant to actually provide shelter. Considering emergency shelters in the name, it feels hard to understand how programs that aren't providing shelter in any capacity are ranked at the very top. Thank you.
So just to clarify, Stacy Bovar, who's online luckily, thank you, Stacy. She said you can answer questions from the public when the item is on the agenda. So feel free to answer that.
I think the answer would be that we intend to go to council. I think we said November 21st. And it would be an opportunity to give public comment at that time. You're also always welcome to email council your thoughts about future agenda items.
And if I can add, folks are always welcome to contact housing staff and drill down into details and ask detailed questions in advance of the public opportunities as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So if that closes public comment, I do see that Commissioner Haley on the line has a comment to make.
So Christine, and I don't know if we should be addressing this or not, but I think emergency shelter was a huge part of it, but it also related to the clearing of the zone and whatnot. So, you know, a bus that offers clothing and showers, I mean, is benefiting the people who could have been displaced by something like that. So,
Yes, yeah, outreach to homeless individuals is a big part of the mobile outreach bus, and that was one of the eligible expenses.
yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't just emergency shelter that was eligible.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other commentary, but before making a motion, I just want to quickly ask, are there any amendments or changes to this that anyone is interested in discussion? And discussing? If not, then I will go ahead and make a motion to forward the ranking committee's recommendations for homeless shelter and service funds allocations to city council with a recommendation for approval. Do I have a second? I'll second. Okay, so I have a second for the motion to, I'm going to repeat that, to forward the ranking committee's recommendation for the homeless shelter and service funds allocations to city council with a recommendation for approval. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm not seeing any opposed. Then,
Did everybody vote?
yeah, I think I heard someone say aye.
I got Jackie.
I voted aye.
Okay.
Is Glenn still on?
Glenn, can you hear us?
If we're not able to confirm if Glenn is on, does that break for us?
Sure does.
Okay.
Glenn, can you speak up if you can hear us? He's unmuted. Could you? No. If your audio does not work, will you, oh, there it is. Glenn, did you vote yes on this item? I think his audio is maybe not working.
He just
Okay.
indicated in the chat.
We're good.
Okay, good, because that would be fun. All right, in that case, the motion passes. And yeah, we can go ahead and bring the vice chair back in, I believe, and move it over to her.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are now on to general business. We have Michelle McNulty with us for the land availability and suitability and code analysis project introduction and update.
So while Adriana pulls that up, I'll introduce myself. I'm Michelle McNulty. I'm the planning director. And I'm gonna give a brief overview of a really exciting project that we're working on with housing and sustainability. I think of it, click. All right.
Just make sure it works.
Oh, it's has the,
I see, you made it fancy.
I didn't mean to make it fancy. So, all right, hopefully the rest of the slides are not fancy. Okay, so the project that I'm going to talk about is the land availability, suitability, and code analysis project. As noted by Vice Chair, it is a mouthful, so we've been calling it the last cap, which is not the best acronym, but it's what we have to work with. And so this is a multi-pronged initiative to address critical long-term planning and resiliency needs. It's a partnership between planning, housing, sustainability, as well as Mountain Line. They have partnered with us. But we have a bunch of our different team members, transportation, engineering, fire, building safety, economic vitality, water services, and it should say Metro Plan instead of Mountain Line, and others who are really participating actively with this. And what's really exciting is it's kind of providing that much needed base for really high level coordination conversations around the city for the different priorities, trying to really work through the tensions between sustainability initiative and the climate emergency and our housing needs. So this is kind of a really three major things and objectives of the project are to look at what land do we even have available left in Flagstaff and what are the barriers to development. What another is the in-depth development code and process analysis. And this isn't just zoning code. This is all of the codes that touch development, which is why we have all those under partners. So it's the building code, engineering standards, water services policies, et cetera. And it's through the lens of both of the climate or the city council's commitments to address climate as well as housing. And the other thing that we really want to emphasize is it's looking at, we have a lot of great things in our code. It's not all bad, and we don't want to throw that away with this. So it's really looking at what is actually is working so we don't lose that, but then identifying what is not so that we can make changes to improve that. And I think most importantly is throughout the process, there is a lot of testing the theory against actual projects. So we're trying to figure out, okay, this is what we come out from a market analysis or literature review, but then applying that to real projects to truth it up to make sure that what we're seeing in the theoretical world is actually matching up with the real world of what's coming out in development. So this is mentioned, and I just can't emphasize it enough. There is a lot of coordination in public outreach. It's a little bit different public outreach than we typically do in planning. It is a bit more focused. We're meeting more with developers, the design community, and other interested groups. But we're also looking at developers who are developing all types of not just market rate housing, but affordable housing. So Eric Wolverton with Habitat for Humanity, Devon McLaughlin, who I know you all know, are also part of these groups, and other people who have experience with affordability and affordable housing. We're also going to be coming out to our advisory committees, obviously housing, sustainability, and transportation, as you guys do represent the commissions that are to the partnership we're working with, and then planning and zoning and city council. So the two-part project, kind of getting into it, why are we doing the land availability suitability? We really have limited lands left, and we need to really understand what are our needs of our community, not just from a housing standpoint, but what do we need from a commercial and industrial needs standpoint? Because we really need to make sure that we're providing jobs for people in our community and that we have the land base to do that as well. As well as it provides the context for recommending right-sized code amendments. So to understand what code changes are appropriate, we need to understand really what the barriers are that we're trying to relieve. Really the land, it's a land inventory. So we hope to approximately identify 50 opportunity sites that could be good for residential development. And those sites could be smaller sites that could be accumulated and combined together to make a larger parcel. So we're looking at a lot of different like infill as well as greenfield development. And then the suitability analysis. So really evaluating what are the site constraints, doing an infrastructure gap analysis, as well as regional cost reduction strategies. And then the deliverable will be a vacant residential land report. Codes and process analysis. This is really kind of like the meat and potatoes of this. There are a lot of codes, as I mentioned, that are being evaluated, as well as our processes. So we have anyone who's ever taken a project through, we have what's called interdivision staff review, where concept plans are brought and all different disciplines come to the table through the lens of their code to kind of give, okay, this is going to be a challenge. They haven't met this code. And we work through that. We really want to understand, is that process helping move projects along, or could it be more efficient to help move faster? Because we understand from our partners that time is money. We're also looking at all of our applications and the review processes, concept plans, site plans, conditional use permits, and zoning map amendments, and then other processes that are identified through this process to look more closely at. So what's happening, what's been happening, this contract was approved in July by City Council. Since then, we have been doing a lot of data collection, GIS, compiling the different development codes and processes. And at this point, and I should have done it at the very beginning, should give a big shout out to Tiffany Antle and Jen Michelson, because they're the ones that have really been leading that part of this, which is the big part, and then building a policy matrix. We formed internal technical advisory groups for both the LAS and the CAP. They're a little bit different, but to make sure that we're getting from the different disciplines, what are from their experience, like from engineering's experience or transportation, what are the different barriers or what they see as challenges to these sites. They've also helped us develop the criteria for identifying the sites, and as well as further refining the available sites. We've been conducting developer and construction cost interviews. So the consultant team has met independent without city staff there to really understand from a developer and contractor standpoint, what are the barriers and kind of the challenges and the pinch points. They've also met with key firms to better understand the financing of construction. And just so you guys know, Devonna has been part of that. So we're getting that perspective from all types of residential development projects. Continued code and process analysis, and then providing updates to our different commissions. And then November 14th, we will be at City Council at their work session to give them an update of where we're at and kind of what are the next steps that they should be looking forward to. The consultant team will be there for that. They're going to be in town to look at the actual sites and kind of ground truth them and get a better familiarity with the actual land. I have to do a scheduled cheat sheet because this is really small, but I just mentioned, so this is kind of an overview. We're packing a lot in, trying to wrap this project up by really like the third quarter of 2024. Some key things. I mentioned that we're going to be at the City Council work session over Q3 and Q4 of this year. So really until 2023. I think I just said 2024, but 2023. We'll be completing that land analysis and evaluating the constraints. We're also doing an equity and displacement vulnerability assessment, which is really key because we're really sensitive to the fact that as we change things and we get more housing and we allow or we make it easier for construction, that we're putting some of our vulnerable residents at risk, and we want to make sure that we're kind of measuring what those impacts may be. We're learning more about what that assessment looks like and how it's going to be used. And I think that will be something when we have a better idea, we'll bring back to this group so that you can understand what we're evaluating the project against. And then just continued code and process review. We want to be back to council around the beginning of 2024 to provide them update on the infrastructure gap analysis, regional development cost reduction strategies, doing the code diagnosis and code update concepts and what those code recommendations are going to look like. We want to make sure we're getting their input right away, but we also want to take the opportunity, if there are some code changes that we can start pushing forward that don't need to wait for further analysis or any input from the regional plan, we'll get started on those. As you saw by Tiffany's presentation today with the various code changes, we're not going to stop not doing code changes. We're continuing to do what we kind of call low-hanging fruit, the ones that are just cleanups that don't need really the data to support them, that we just know these are things we need to clean up now. We'll make bigger changes as this analysis is complete. And then kind of wrapping up in 2024, the actual recommendations and impact modeling. And then a lot of this will be informing the regional plan. As we're doing this, the regional plan is also kind of informing what we're doing. I don't know how many of you have participated in the scenario planning that Sarah Decker has been leading at different workshops. But in a lot of ways, what we're doing is a different way of kind of looking at the questions. So we're kind of truthing up each other's work and keep coordinating to make sure that we're getting the same or kind of understanding each other's data. A lot of this is going to be a prioritized work plan from council, kind of telling us, okay, these are the important things that we need to keep moving forward with and make this part of your work plan. So you'll be seeing that. At that point, we will start doing our more robust community-wide public outreach as we actually start to develop the actual code language. And then we will be continuing to process or vet the process as modified by the recommendations. So that's my quick overview. And then just again, really this project team is myself, Tiffany, Jen Michelson, and then Genevieve Fairthree from Sustainability. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
So how do you propose to get past the barrier of taking down land at a fair market without paying fair market? Because land's expensive. So how are you going to overcome that? To make it
Great question. And I think it's one of the things that this consultant team is working on is the housing incentive housing process in different ways. I don't know. I mean, that's one of the biggest barriers we have. And so we have to look at how do we incentivize? Is it other incentivized things that we can do that kind of offset that cost? But
I
it's,
think that's the big $1,000,000 question we've all tried.
yeah. And that's really why we're also looking at that infrastructure, that regional kind of infrastructure cost strategies is, okay, if we can't bring down the cost of the land, is there other things that we can bring the cost of? So it's kind of, I think, it's not easy. It is, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're actually legally precluded from paying less than market value unless eminent domain is exercised. Our city council, 23 years, has been reticent to use eminent domain unless they're absolutely forced to. And so I am always hopeful. We used to have land acquisition money back in the day, pre-2008, where we were able to purchase land off of the market in order to dedicate it towards affordable housing. So we have an old model that we've utilized. Funding has been a challenge for that. But we're also anxious to see results coming out of this study that would help us plan better in order to potentially acquire some of that land ourselves or to work with community partners to assist them in acquiring it, all for the purposes of creating additional units. Does that help?
Yeah.
Somewhat?
So if we come across anybody as a realtor that maybe wants extended family and trust, they want to just donate, they would come to you, and not that would have, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, that's always the vision, right? Is that
Right.
somebody's like, I believe in this community
Right.
and I am going to. I haven't seen it yet. Actually, we've seen it one time. Always possible. We would welcome it. We're not always the best recipients. We have a number of very savvy, capable nonprofits in our community. For the city to dispose of land, for the city to sell land, it's a massive process and it doesn't always serve the purposes of the future users because of the procurement processes and charter limitations we have on disposing of land. And so there have been times previously where we have been approached and someone has said, hey, what about? And we're like, great, can we introduce you over here to all of these other parties? Because we don't need to be master of all, nor do we really want to be. So I think it's really a true community effort. in both identifying those opportunities and taking advantage of them so that the best use of that land can be realized. So
Well, like all the amendments, I think they're well strategized.
we are so lucky to be surrounded by such expertise, teamwork, and great discussion. Like, we agreed in the scoping meeting for this project that nothing was taboo. Everything is on the table, and we at least have to discuss it. Maybe not everything stays on the table, but if someone has an idea or the other pieces, we don't want to be hitting heads. It's not sustainability or housing. It's not, beautiful buildings or this. It's an and that we need to work in every way that we can to get the greatest benefit for our community overall, realizing that there, of course, will be occasions where one will come out above the other, but that we need to set up systems for longevity purposes where it's not a consistent one over the other, and we're equally valuing community benefit. So.
Oh, yeah, I've got a couple comments and questions. I'll just hit the first one and then give space for other commissioners to speak. This is a question about the scope of work. Are you going to consider policy changes that complement zoning changes but aren't zoning themselves? I can give an example.
Yeah, we have.
Like if you're considering eliminating parking mandates in order to allow more affordable housing, would you also speak to the need for parking districts, which are a useful way of managing parking conflicts and the arrests from that?
I think that, yes, definitely those will be part of the recommendations that come out in the code and process recommendations to council. And it might not be that we change the policy, but that's where it starts to inform the regional plan. But these are policies that we need to really start to implement.
Okay. And one more question. So I'm assuming this is a yes, but I just want to check. Are you looking at other cities that have already done this? And the big example that comes to my mind is Buffalo's green code overhaul back in like 2016, 2017. I think that's been really successful. There's a lot of case studies on it. It was also motivated by a lot of housing and sustainability concerns. I'm assuming you're like looking at.
We do have peer cities, Buffalo, Lakewood, Colorado. They have a, I believe it's actually a green code. It's like an alternative to their zoning code. And so it's a way of incentivizing. So you can check that out. There's not a lot of communities that have actually done exactly what we're doing. So you were starting to see it, and actually the consultant team has said, and they've done land availability and suitability, and they've done kind of some code analysis between the two firms that came together. But since they've responded to this RSOQ, they have seen it in other communities, and I think they're working in Bozeman, Montana as well, who is really having some similar issues as we do and has very similar demographics. And so that's another peer city as they're looking at.
And I'll give some space for other commissioners to ask questions.
You might get your space back.
In that case, I do have one other question. So there's a lot of commissioners here. There's a lot of people here that have a lot of background and a lot of good ideas on this, a lot of enthusiasm around this. And I think this has kind of been worked on before. Like I remember there were even subgroups that got together and made a list of like potential zoning changes. I'm pretty sure I still have access to that in my Google Drive. Is there any way for those people to take that work and those ideas that have already been established and contribute to this? Or is it just the only way to interact with this is really through the commission updates and through the public participation process?
If I may, the process I believe you're referring to was in the creation of the 10-year plan. Is when we had subgroups reviewing different zoning pieces and things that could be brought forward. And those were rolled into the 10-year plan. The 10-year plan is being utilized by the consultant groups and staff in order to make sure those ideas are already front of mind The intent of today's presentation was an update because we're in a weedy staff process and we don't want the idea out there that nothing's happening. Like this is a massive corner of the 10-year plan for this full code review, et cetera. And we're in an internal process going through really, really weedy items. So we asked Michelle to come to give an update so you know that it's happening, you know that it's underway, and not just some ethereal idea that it's happening, but a little more detail. It's my understanding that recommendations resulting from this will come back to commissions.
That's correct. So as I mentioned, kind of after we cheat sheet, probably around like the, second quarter, third quarter of 2024, we will be back. We'll have enough of that data to really come back and start to show this commission where we're going with it and get feedback. And reminding everybody that the code changes are going to be later. So really, as you're informing that and providing the feedback to what the recommendations that come out, that starts to inform the code changes that are going to come out of this and the prioritization of those code changes.
Well, in that case, thank you for the update. And I just want to say I'm very enthusiastic and excited for the project and see where it goes. It's something I've been looking forward to a long time.
But thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. We do still have some updates, but we are at time, so we just need to confirm that everybody's able to stay a few more minutes. We'd love for Jennifer to be able to give us the bond update. Council work session and then everybody.
It's an hour like last time.
Yeah, but we need to maintain the forum, so can we just confirm that?
Do we have to do a vote or anything, or are we good to just jump into it?
Dan, while you're pulling that up, I would just like to say I did sit in on the online. Are you guys all able to, give us a thumbs up or something if you're able to stay? I was able to sit in the other night and I just want to commend staff. You guys did an amazing job. There were some tough, valid, but tough questions. And I just thought you guys did a great job representing everything that we had talked about in this room. So thank you.
Thank you. That feels good to hear that. I was going to kind of back up to almost literally a month ago. I was here with everybody. There's so many more of you all here. But so I just want to thank the commission again for providing that recommendation so that we could get it ready to council. It was a really rapid kind of turnaround, getting a staff summary put together and everything, getting the document in shape to bring to them. We did go to a work session, which is not an action meeting. It was a discussion on October 24th. That was 2 days ago. So on the October 24th work session, we got great, lengthy, in-depth discussion with council. We did end up with, overall, they were happy with what they saw. They did have some in-depth questions. We came out of that meeting with 3 sort of clarifying items that we needed to finalize in the draft program. So what those were, a real quick summary was we added clarifying language about the NOFA process being able to be repeated if there were remaining or return program funds. They wanted us to be able to go back out and make those available in a separate new NOFA process. So I believe that was just a matter of adding like clarifying language in the sentence. We removed acquisition as an eligible use and put it into the ineligible uses for funds. I think it was just a little too risky. I think they wanted to see a project a bit more advanced in the process. So that was one specific change. A third one was clarifying language. We had a clarifying language about funds being made available after. It was a timing issue. How quickly can funding be made available to developers after council approves it? So we just clarified with them that there should not be some milestone or trigger event like we won't give you the loan until you're at building permit. We clarified with them they wanted to just let's make it available to everybody as soon as council approves the funding. So those were the clarifications. We have already submitted the final draft of the program yesterday.
yesterday for the November 7th council agenda. So we will be back to them on November 7th for their consideration and hopeful approval of our program. So, and then it'll be, we'll hit the road again immediately to be starting to finalize the NOFA application and scoring criteria, all of that in the weeds, kind of nitty gritty work that we're going to have to do as soon as possible. One more little thing, we did develop a suggested time frame for the next several process items that need to take place with some target dates for us to implement. So we'll be busy back to back to back until we get those contracts out. So that's all I have.
Any comments or questions? Thank you again. That was a tough one and I just thought you guys did a great job. So any other updates that anyone feels super pressing?
Staff will just email anything that wasn't covered in this meeting just for the sake of saving a little bit of time.
All right, thank you all for being here. Then we will adjourn at 3:05. Thank you. Not this week, but maybe next week.